I dressed up for you. This is serious business. Welcome to Table Talk Back, where we look at your responses to the previous Table Talk episode, the previous one being about table space. And if you haven't seen that, well, you should watch that down below because it informs the conversation that we're going to be having here, or you can just listen to me as I recap it for you right now. But I like this format. I like this format. It's inspired by Rodney Smith of Watch It Played, who I won it from in an underground back alley bounce-off competition. I won it from him all those years ago, and he's now started doing more Table Talk Back episodes and Table Talk episodes. So, Rodney, well, you should check the terms of our blood pact. But that aside, it's a great series. Rodney is great at it. You should go check him out. And you should drop your comments down below if you missed the first one. We were talking about table space and the idea of what can actually be a barrier to entry for gaming. And I think that's the sort of core hypothesis and theory that I want to keep talking about and what I feel resonated with a lot of people in the comments. The idea of barriers to the hobby and some of the barriers we don't consider. And so, I even want to start off right away with this comment by user, a lot of letters there, who says, I'm disabled and often have to play games while in bed using a large tray. This limits my gaming choices quite a lot, even to the point where I consider remaking components to reduce their size. My current project is to recreate the specialists and locations from Chronicles of Crime as playing card size. As long as I can scan the QR codes, they just don't need to be that big. I'd also like to redo the location tiles for Mansions of Madness, as I currently have to draw a map in a notebook so I know which tiles were where when I have to lift earlier ones for lack of space on my tray. I can understand people wanting big, easy-to-read components, but there's always been a niche for travel-sized versions, which seem to be currently getting overlooked. And that idea, it brings up a lot of points, right? Because the initial pushback that I feel you would hear from people with larger games says, no, it has to be done this way, or there's always going to be people in the minority, we can't cater to everyone, yada yada. And not only is that, one, horribly inconsiderate to those who struggle with accessibility issues, but two, completely overlooks that the idea of travel versions are a thing. And it's fascinating to me that so many games have put out travel versions. You've seen it now with Azul Mini. There's a small portable Catan that I've seen. Quirkle has a mini version. Hive is one of the largest contributors, and it has a smaller version and in Hive Pocket. And it's arguably the thing that I would want more because it puts it at a cheaper price and allows you to have it be the portable game that Hive sort of purports itself to be. But the fact that so many games can be remade with the actual interesting, usable elements to it being smaller is really interesting to me. I'm not necessarily saying that every game has to be done this way, but it kind of blew my mind as a thought experiment to think about the core components that are actually driving the game state and all of the other extraneous stuff that you find on cards. And to be fair, I don't know if I want to live in a world where Chronicles of Crime is only tiny QR codes and I don't get to see their fun faces, because I like the artwork on the characters and it paints a picture, but all of that the sprawling locations of Chronicles of Crime, just so you can put cards on cards in a way to augment your app-driven experience, is kind of interesting to me. And also, just the reminder that there are other people out there who would love to play your game and sometimes can't due to accessibility issues is, I think, an important reminder that perhaps we don't always have front of mind. And so this comment also kind of nicely captures that idea of what is necessary to actually play the game. AF Nord says, I think it really boils down to what is necessary. Well, there you go. It's almost like I read that before I said that sentence. Some games really do need to be big to get at what they're trying to do if you want to avoid them feeling cluttered, because the theme, feel, and or scale necessitates having a lot of components and a big table presence. But then you get the games that are just big to be eye-catching where size adds very little. Finally, somebody said it. You heard it here first. Size adds very little, okay? I'll openly admit that I'm a sucker for a game that has a lot of nice-looking components, so I'm part of the reason why some games get so unnecessarily deluxeified. When I'm there in the store, my eye gets drawn to the games that have detailed minis and a plethora of little tokens, even if that's not necessarily what ends up giving me the best gaming experience. Ultimately, Evolution has given me more fun than Descent, but Descent is so shiny and nice with all those plastic models. And I think that's also kind of apt, adding to that idea of necessity versus fun factor, right? The idea of distilling everything down to its basics requires you to remove key elements, and I guess boils down to what you do enjoy in gaming. Is it enough to have that slight barrier to comfort, to have that wild presence or the large scale shiny things? I think a lot of people on this channel, as I do a lot of Kickstarter coverage, are drawn in by that deluxified and that shiny nature. And of course, it's fun. It unlocks our inner child. It gives us toys to play with. It gives us beautiful, beautiful art and wild, imaginative worlds that can immerse us in this fun puzzle and kind of stimulate both our mathematical and puzzly brains and our creative brains in terms of creating story and theme. And I think all that is wonderful and why I particularly love board games. And I think that that initial feeling and that push towards that was a genuine, beautiful thing. However, now we have to decide at what point does it get too excessive. I suppose the market will dictate that. We don't have to decide right here. I mean, we can all make our own personal decisions, but I'm interested to see because of the trends of our hobby going towards bigger and bigger, and that being the thing that does get the attention and therefore continues forward in this feedback loop, those sort of smaller and accessible travel versions aren't as sexy, aren't as spicy, and often get overlooked. When I think not enough praise goes the way of those games that enable people to get them to the table and are unassuming in their presence, right? And another comment kind of touches on that by Jay Rayner 6621, who says, I think the core of the issue is those who design with an eye towards efficiency and spatially tight gameplay generally don't consider art and presentation as a priority. Meanwhile, those who have a flair for art and theme generally let their vision trend towards sprawling scope. This presents a conundrum for visually driven people. Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion is a rare beast that moved from a behemoth table presence to embrace a much more accessible and spatially friendly size. Usually, evolutions of a creator's vision take the reverse approach, constantly trending bigger. And I think that's really true, that oftentimes when you see reprints happen, you'll see the trend goes in that explosion element because generally you're adding in an expansion. And so, of course, with an expansion, you need a bigger box to house it all. And of course, with that bigger box, you need to add in more plastic bits and make it the collector's edition and add in more stuff. And slowly it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger until you're left with the Everdell big box. If Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion is the reverse of that, I think Everdell, which I have here, I took it with me. Everdell is one of my favorite games of all time. I think it is such an exceptionally fun game. And it is something that I genuinely want all of the content for. And yet, I am scared to do so because of the size of the box that is coming my way, because of the amount that you have to load into the game. The box, the collector's edition box, is larger than Gloomhaven. It would be the largest box in my entire collection. And while I don't mind that, being able to dedicate it towards a game that I really love and that I play frequently, there's an element of trepidation that it would lessen my enjoyment because of that inefficiency, because of that extra labor to get to the table, and because I wouldn't be able to take it to a friend's house. Somebody else down here in the comments said a similar thing, and I'm trying to find it right now. This isn't the one that I'm looking for, but it's a good one. Jono NZ Board Gamer says, I like the idea of a big box as a means to get all the content for a game I'm sure I'll love, especially if the price is good compared to buying separately. But the mental energy / barrier to pulling them out often means I gravitate towards small boxes and table space games. Small table space games, rather. Regarding table space, I'm with you 100% that it should be big enough to make the game usable, but no bigger than necessary. Table space is limited for the majority of players that don't have a dedicated gaming space. I still laugh at La Granja expansion for La Granja Master Set. It made the central board 1 meter by 1 meter and each player board the size of a large playmat. That would only ever fit on someone's floor. And that's the fear, right? As we move forward to try to stand out in this space, the only way to stand out is to physically stand out, to take up more room on the shelves, to take these things that were streamlined and make them less so. I mean, I love the concept of a giant Catan board that people can play on, like in the Catan World Championships. There's like a big mat setup. It's a life-size Catan board, or those life-size chess boards. I think those are fun, but I don't want those in my house. And so it's a weird conversation of finding that balance and finding what is necessary and what is just there to shock someone into selling it, or to prey upon the uniqueness of it, or there's a word I'm looking for here. It's the thing that your family members get you that's tertiarily related and is just kind of a cash grab. You know what I mean? That idea of pushing these things forward just for the sake of getting attention in a crowded market, and that doesn't necessarily serve the experience, is a tough one, because you have to be discovered, right? You have to be doing things that get you noticed, or else your game won't sell. And so it's kind of bucking to the trend, or conforming to the trend rather, conforming to this trend that has to happen. Here was the comment about Everdell that I was looking for. There were a few people who mentioned Everdell, and I think it's a great example. After receiving the Everdell big box, I had a reckoning with what I want from a board game. Had I played all the expansions beforehand, I'd have just bought Spirecrest. It's not that all the expansions are bad, it's just that the thought of opening up that box is so stressful. So games like Frostpunk, The Great Wall, and Frosthaven come across to me as taking up too much space with too many fiddly rules and too much setup for me to find it fun. And that kind of goes back towards the question that I posed to people who have a larger gaming space, because me, I don't. I'm never going to have a board gaming table because I need modularity in my setup, because generally I live in Toronto and I don't have the luxury of having a lot of space. That's just hazard of being an artist, being somebody who doesn't have the money to afford an expensive house in a very expensive city and needs to be in that city for work. It's just it. And so I asked people, what about those of you who do have that dedicated space? Do you find that barrier to entry is still there? And this is a comment that I really wanted to talk about that related to that. Gregory says, having just moved from a 1x1 apartment to a bigger house, I thought that I would be playing a lot more bigger box games. Surprisingly, I haven't found that to be the case. I think it comes down to, as you noted, number one, whether you have the time to set up and play bigger box games, and two, whether you have a dedicated board game table and or table where you can leave the game set up for extended period. If the answer to both of those questions is no, table hog games are probably not going to be seeing as much play times as other smaller box games. However, on the other end of things, Roger says, I adore huge fiddly games. I love setting up so many pieces and bits and cards, but I live in a one-bedroom apartment and would set up Arkham Horror on our kitchen table and a fold-out table. It was an all-day affair. I would then have to pack it all up, which took forever, so it was only on very rare occasions it came out. We rarely got other games out because of the space. I moved and am now in a rented house with a few rooms and a full empty garage where I have the luxury of setting up bigger games. I don't have the money for a fully loaded gaming table. I mean, seriously, who does? But I'm looking for a free dining room table I can set up. I also have a folding table in my office with a game permanently set up. Space is a, pun intended, big factor, and I know what it's like to want smaller games for smaller spaces. I can only now actually enjoy the table hog games that have sat on my shelves for years. And this brings up a really interesting point in terms of just buying expectations, right? I always talk about this in terms of managing our purchasing expectations, and I myself try to be frugal and remind myself to be frugal and not let my eyes be bigger than my stomach, which I've had trouble with in the past, but I'm getting better on. And hopefully we all are getting better on together. And that idea of recognizing the physical constraints and the physical limitations to your purchasing habits, I think is really important. That has helped me stave off the feeling of purchasing all these great games that I want to play and I feel like I love, but I don't have the space for it. Perhaps it would be different if I did have that different setup, but that's not my reality. That's not the space in which I exist in, and that's not going to happen for a very long time. And so recognizing that and realizing the impact that table space does have on your gaming habits, which can then hopefully be applied to your purchasing habits, I think will ultimately lead you to get more games to the table. And that's what we want, right? One last thought to finish us off on, and I thought this was a really lovely one, is that it creates the idea for board game cafes. An awesome place where you can go and play a game and they have the space that you do not. You can sit down and have a day of it and play those big, large-scale games and experience them. A few people mentioned them in the comments, and I was looking through and I can't quite find them right now. But it was just a really lovely sentiment and a really lovely push for, I can play those larger games elsewhere, right? I can play them where the space and the environment is set up more perfectly to play those things. And I think you'll find that those experiences will be deeper and potentially more special if you maybe find the distinction between those two things and play in different areas. I just thought that was kind of a fun thought. However, one last thought to finish us off is, to be fair, Steve says, you didn't mention one of the added features of many large expansive games. After the main gameplay, they give one a polyomino-like bonus game of trying to fit everything back in the box. Then there's the hide-and-seek game, when components fall off the floor due to lack of table space, and can be further enhanced if the cat finds them first. And for a lot of people, the hide-and-seek game of hiding those large purchases from your significant other in the closet. Don't do that. Anyway, thanks to everybody who contributed comments about the conversation of table space and accessibility and what makes a game accessible and what doesn't. There's a ton of great comments back in the other video. I just kind of picked and chose some ones to talk about, but I really appreciate everybody chiming in. And feel free to chime in down below if any of these comments sparked some thoughts in you as well. I was particularly like this series because it's just having a fun conversation with some fun people, right? So if you're still here, give a little boop on the like button. Just boop it. And hopefully this reflection was interesting. I actually found it to be pretty helpful. And recognizing that idea of barrier to entry, I think makes me a better consumer and makes me more sensible with my purchases in terms of realistic expectations, and I think that's always a good thing. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. My name is Chris George, and I do not have a catchphrase, unfortunately. But my Everdell is portable. At least there's that.